Right, in my paint palette I've got ultramarine, yellow ochre and burnt sienna, and you need water for this because you're going to put thin washes on. A small brush and a flat shader it's called. So I'm going to start over on the far side. In fact, I'll start with the moon first. So I need a little tiny bit of ultramarine and a tiny bit of burnt sienna and quite a bit of water, and also a kitchen towel. I think that'll do for the moon. So what we're going to do is put some very thin washes on here, more like watercolour wash. I've already put ultramarine on the sky and a deep purple on the sea, a very deep purple. But what I have done is, for the sky, ultramarine is transparent, so to take the transparency off you just mix a very tiny bit of white in with it. This doesn't really change the colour, it just makes it opaque. So I have put 2 or 3 coats on that because I wanted it very flat and very opaque. If you try and use ultramarine without the white in, you get streaks everywhere. I suppose that the same goes for any transparent paint. But what I do is I mix it in a pot, one of these pots, because it's very difficult to mix acrylic paint in exactly the same shade you had it before, because it does change colour. Like watercolour paint goes very dry, goes much lighter. Acrylic paint goes slightly darker. So what I'm going to do is paint this with very thin washes. So we've got some sandstone or rocks, I think, down here. So I'm going to use burnt sienna very thinly, some of the mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine, and mix it in. Now I only want this very light, it's more to give a bit of interest than anything else. It doesn't matter if it's patchy. And don't forget to go around the corners because that'll save you framing it. I'm going to go over the boat temporarily. Now I'm not bothered about the colour of the houses in this painting. Because that's not the aim. The aim is not to paint a photograph. The aim is to give an impression of this painting's padstone. Now sometimes when I do this technique I have a few paintings on the go at once because you've got to wait for the tissue to dry, and then you have to wait for the white paint to dry. So I usually have about 3 going and I swap from one to another depending on the wet, you know, when they're dry or wet. I can see that moon, I'm a bit patchy there. You also have to be aware, if that's the moon, then your light is coming this way. So some areas are going to be darker. So I'm going to make some very thin ultramarine. Now this is ultramarine that hasn't had white mixed in, because I do want it to be a bit transparent, and it's a bit dense at the moment. I need it more watery than that. So we do have some shade here because they are steps. But I don't want it to be as flat as that, so I'm going to tap a bit off and mix a bit of burnt sienna. Now I'm quite happy to mix it on here, and I'm quite happy that it goes patchy. Also on the other side of the steps here, in fact I'll use that grey I mixed before. Using this flat brush, it means you can do the steps easier because you use the shape of the brush. Now that to me is a bit dark, so what I'm going to do is dab it off and put a bit of blue in. I'll go round the boat this time because that's a bit darker than I need, and I'll put some darker down there and I'll mix some more. You really do need this quite runny to do this, because you want it to run in the creases. Now that's going to be quite dark in there, although not as dark as that. Maybe put a tinge of yellow ochre in there. Now, like I say, these houses are not this colour in reality. I think they're white, but they're going to get a very light coating of yellow ochre. And because I've put the white paint on first to seal where the glue is, I can actually put more water on if I think it's too dark. And I can also dab some off add some shading. I'm not using any great painting skills doing this. It's more like a colouring book. Now again, this has gone very dark here, but I'm going to flood it with water, spread it over there, and dab it off. And go round the corner. While it's still damp, I'm going to go in some areas with grey, and a bit of burnt sienna. bit more grey, I think, needed there. Now normally I wouldn't put so much detail on these windows, but they're quite characteristic, the windows here. So I've drawn them so I can see through them. I'll pick them up later when I put some detail in over the top. Now that building up there in the corner is catching the moonlight, so I'm going to do that more yellow. I'll just turn this round a bit. So you can see it better. So I'm going to leave that pretty much that yellow. Although I think it does need a little bit of burnt sienna, because it's not patchy enough really. Right, these houses I'm going to give the same treatment. They're going to be yellow ochre. Now this yellow ochre is not transparent, but using it this thin you can see right through it, so I'm just giving these a very light wash, making sure it goes in all the nooks and crannies. Now this end, gable end, I'm going to paint it yellow ochre. You must be horrified the way I'm just sort of colouring this in, but really that's exactly what I'm using it like, a colouring book. No great painting skills involved. All the skill in this painting is getting your drawing right in the first place, and thinking, where are my shadows? Right, now this is going to be in shadow, so I need to mix some more burnt sienna and ultramarine to get a grey browny sort of colour, and dilute it down, and really dilute it down. Whoops-a-daisy, I've got some patches there, splodges. Now this is in shade here, but again there's too much there, so I'm going to spread it a bit. And I'll put a bit more burnt sienna in. And also just here, that's in more shade. I think I'll put a bit more grey in there because it's quite dark. You can always add more later if it's not dark enough for you. And I'll put a bit more dark in there, I think, and also I'll run a bit more dark this way. Oh, this is why it's important when you seal it, because you can put these washes on and the underneath is sealed, so it's not going to wreck your painting or anything. I'm just rubbing that yellow ochre in a bit more there, and I think it needs a bit more burnt sienna. I'm going to put more shade here. Because the pathway is sort of shaded, although I can see some that's gone where I don't want it, so I can just lift it off like you do with watercolour. I think I'll put a bit more burnt sienna on there, give it a bit more colour. And perhaps a little bit more blue, although if I mix it on here it's going to go grey browny sort of colour. It does dry quite quick, this. If you touch it, that's drying up. Right, now the roofs I'm going to do again more ultramarine, but with a little bit of grey in. So I'm going to go round the corner again. Just dab it there because I want the moonlight to catch a bit there. Now I've got chimneys here which are going to be yellow ochre. I'll put the shading in a minute. And I'll also paint the chimney pots later. Another chimney over here. And one here. I think that's it for chimneys. Right, more light bluey grey for the roofs. So I want that a bit light on that side, so I can dab that off and dab that off. And that's too grey for me. I'm just dab it all off and then add a bit more blue. Right, the boats I'm going to paint bluish. Not that blue though. I think I'll put a bit of grey in that. I don't want them to stand out too much. I think I'll put some burnt sienna in there. And on the cabin. Although that's not quite enough, is it? I think that's too much paint there. And I think this boat needs to be dark around here. And where the shadow is on the steps, we just need where the tread goes down, we need some shade. And they're very wonky steps, but it doesn't matter because it's a wonky painting. That'll do for those.